Captain Sarah "Viper" Jennings walked into the briefing room with her usual calm confidence. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, casting a golden light over the rows of maps and screens, displaying satellite images of the mission area. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper, a familiar scent that always accompanied pre-mission briefings. Sarah's eyes scanned the room quickly, taking in the faces of her team and the senior officers who would be overseeing the operation. She had flown countless missions before, and she knew that first impressions could be deceiving. Some people judged too quickly, especially when they saw someone young and female wearing a call sign like Viper. As she approached the front of the room, she could feel a few eyes on her, not all friendly. A couple of senior officers exchanged subtle glances and whispered to each other. Then came the first chuckle. Sarah's heart didn't race. She was used to the skepticism that came with being a woman in a male-dominated field, especially one as competitive as the Air Force. She smiled politely, aware that some people thought a name like Viper was funny, maybe even silly. It was meant to evoke speed, precision, and danger, all qualities she had spent years developing. But the mocking tone in the room suggested that not everyone appreciated it. As she keyed her microphone to introduce herself, a few officers whispered, "Viper? Really? That's her call sign." Their voices were low, but loud enough for others near them to hear. A few snickers followed. Sarah felt their eyes on her, sizing her up, trying to see if her actions would match the intimidating name. She had been here before, the laughter, the doubt, the tiny tests of patience and professionalism. But she never let it bother her. She knew that names were just words. It was what a person could do that truly mattered. "Captain Sarah Jennings, call sign Viper, ready for briefing," she said clearly into the microphone. Her voice was steady, professional, and carried a subtle authority that demanded attention, even if some of the officers were reluctant to give it. She could feel the tension in the room. Some were still trying not to laugh, while others were curious, trying to figure out if she was all talk or if the name had weight behind it. The mission briefing began, and the room dimmed slightly as the projector displayed a detailed map of the target area. Sarah moved closer, studying the routes, the positions of Allied forces, and the possible locations of enemy activity. She pointed out strategic points, showing a deep understanding of the terrain and potential risks. Her knowledge was precise, her planning meticulous. She knew that in situations like these, every second and every decision could mean the difference between success and disaster. Yet, as she spoke, she noticed the occasional smirk or sideways glance from the officers who had mocked her call sign. It was a subtle reminder that she had to prove herself, not just through words but through action. Despite the subtle ridicule, Sarah kept her composure. She had learned long ago that professionalism and confidence spoke louder than any joke or sneer. In her mind, she went through every possible scenario, preparing for contingencies that most people wouldn't even consider. The mocking tone in the room fueled her determination rather than shaking her. She knew that every successful maneuver she would make during this mission could turn doubt into respect. Some of her teammates whispered encouragements under their breath, sensing the tension and understanding the challenge of working under scrutiny. They knew Sarah's reputation for excellence. They had flown with her before, witnessed her skill in complex and dangerous missions. But the room was full of new faces, people who had not yet seen what Viper could do. To them, she was still just a name that seemed out of place, a symbol they didn't fully understand. The briefing continued, and Sarah explained her approach to the mission, highlighting key objectives and safety measures. She emphasized teamwork, clear communication, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. Every point she made was backed with reasoning and experience, and slowly, a few skeptical faces softened. It was clear that Sarah was not just any pilot. She had a strategy, a mind for tactics, and a steady hand that could guide her team through the most dangerous situations. Yet, even as she spoke with precision and authority, the lingering laughter from earlier reminded her that perception could lag behind reality. Some officers still whispered, thinking the name Viper was amusing or trying to diminish her credibility. But Sarah did not falter. She knew that soon enough, actions would speak louder than any words, and the doubts of the room would vanish when they witnessed her in action. By the end of the briefing, the tension in the room had shifted slightly. While not everyone was fully convinced, a sense of curiosity had replaced some of the mockery. Sarah had done more than introduce herself. She had shown that she was prepared, capable, and unfazed by the whispers. She was ready, and in her mind, she knew that the mission ahead would prove far more than her call sign. It would prove her skill, her courage, and her ability to lead in the face of doubt. As she left the briefing room to prep for the operation, she felt the weight of the stairs, but it no longer bothered her. She had accepted that skepticism was part of the territory. The name Viper was more than a label. It was a promise, and soon everyone would see exactly what it meant. After the briefing, Captain Sarah Viper Jennings moved to her aircraft, her mind still buzzing with the details of the mission. The plan was clear on paper, but she knew that in real situations, no plan survives contact with the enemy without adaptation. She walked past the hangar, where mechanics and ground crew were performing last-minute checks on planes. Their faces showed respect and focus. They had seen her handle high-risk operations before and trusted her completely. But as she glanced toward the command area, she noticed some of the senior officers from the briefing still exchanging uncertain looks. They hadn't forgotten the call sign. Some still whispered, questioning whether someone named Viper could truly handle a critical operation. Sarah shook off the thought. She had grown used to this kind of doubt. In her career, she had learned that people often judge by appearances or names before seeing real skill. The key was patience and precision. Let them underestimate her. They would understand soon enough. As she climbed into the cockpit, she ran through her checklist with practiced ease. Every lever, every switch, every gauge had its place, and she knew them all by heart. The familiar hum of the engines starting under her feet was comforting. It reminded her why she loved flying, how it gave her control, clarity, and a unique perspective over a chaotic world below. She could see patterns in chaos that others missed. This mission would demand exactly that skill, and she felt ready. Meanwhile, back at the briefing room, the officers who had mocked her call sign were now reviewing the mission again, trying to find flaws in the plan or weaknesses in the team's execution. Some were more curious than skeptical now, but the laughter from before lingered subtly in the air, like a shadow that wouldn't quite fade. They discussed the operation in hushed tones, clearly wondering how someone like Viper would fit into such a high-stakes mission. The operation itself was dangerous, involving multiple teams on the ground and in the air. Sarah's role was crucial. She was tasked with air support and reconnaissance, monitoring enemy movements, and providing cover when necessary. Her knowledge of the terrain was unmatched, and her precision flying was something few could rival. Still, she could feel the weight of the unspoken judgment from some officers. They were waiting to see if the jokes they had made were justified, or if Viper would prove them completely wrong. As the team prepared for takeoff, Sarah ran through every scenario in her mind. What if the enemy moved unexpectedly? What if communication lines failed? What if ground units required immediate extraction? Every what if had a corresponding plan. Her attention to detail was the reason she had survived previous missions where others had failed. She knew that her calm, calculated approach was what truly set her apart, not the flashy call sign. On the ground, some teammates whispered to each other, noticing the subtle tension in the command chain. They knew Sarah's reputation and had flown with her before. They trusted her completely. But for new personnel and some senior officers, this was a test. They hadn't seen her in action yet, and their doubts were natural. Sarah understood that the first few minutes of the mission would either silence the mockery or confirm it. She was ready for either outcome. The moment came for takeoff. Engines roared, the plane surged forward, and the hangar doors slid open. As she lifted into the sky, the ground crew gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Sarah's mind was entirely on the mission now, leaving no room for doubt or distraction. She scanned the terrain below with keen eyes, noticing every detail, the positions of Allied forces, the possible hiding spots for the enemy, even subtle shifts in the environment that could affect the operation. Her mind worked like a finely tuned machine, processing risks and opportunities faster than anyone on the ground could. Even as she soared higher, she could feel the weight of expectation. Some officers, still watching from the control room, whispered among themselves. Could someone with a playful-sounding call sign really carry such responsibility? Sarah didn't answer them. She didn't need to. She knew the truth. Her skill, her experience, and her focus were what mattered, not the name on the radio. As the aircraft moved into position, the tension started to build. The mission required split-second decisions, and every moment mattered. Sarah double-checked her instruments, her mind racing through contingencies. She remembered lessons from previous missions, situations where timing, courage, and precision had made all the difference. This mission would test all of that, and more. Despite the tension, Sarah remained calm. She had faced skepticism before, had been mocked and underestimated countless times, and she had learned to turn doubt into motivation. Every glance of disbelief, every whisper of doubt, fueled her determination. She knew that in just a short while, actions would speak louder than any name, any joke, any whisper in the briefing room. By the time the aircraft reached the mission's staging area, Sarah was fully in control, fully focused. The ground team and her fellow pilots looked to her for direction. She was no longer just Viper in name. She was the leader, the decision-maker, the pilot who could change the course of the operation with skill and courage. And while some may have doubted her at first, Sarah knew that once the mission unfolded, there would be no question of who she truly was. The operation had officially begun, and Captain Sarah "Viper" Jennings felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy but familiar cloak. The moment she had prepared for was here. Flying at low altitude over the mission area, she scanned the landscape below with sharp, trained eyes. Everything looked calm at first glance. The trees swayed gently in the wind, a river sparkled under the sun, but Sarah knew better. Danger could appear anywhere, and her instincts told her that the calm surface often hid the most serious threats. As the ground forces moved into position, Sarah noticed small, almost imperceptible signs that the enemy was not where they had been predicted to be. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the treeline, and vehicles that weren't on the map moved along hidden paths. Her fingers hovered over the controls, adjusting the plane's speed and altitude, so she could get a better view without revealing herself to enemy scouts. Her heart did not race, but her senses were heightened. Every decision mattered, and there was no room for error. Suddenly, the communications system flickered. The usual chatter of ground units and fellow pilots became fragmented, and some voices disappeared entirely. A blackout. In that split second, the world seemed to tighten around her. Normally, she could rely on constant updates and confirmations from the team, but now she was flying blind in terms of coordination. The team below would not know when or where air support would arrive, and any delay could be catastrophic. Sarah's mind worked instantly, analyzing all possible scenarios. She had trained for moments like this, moments when technology failed, when reliance on instinct and skill became the only path to success. The enemy, sensing opportunity, began moving faster. Small groups appeared from concealed locations, aiming to flank the ground teams. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she tracked their movement. She recognized patterns from previous engagements, subtle signs that revealed intentions even before actions were taken. Her training allowed her to predict their paths, anticipate their strategies, and position her aircraft where it would have maximum impact. Every maneuver had to be precise. A mistake could mean loss of life below or failure of the entire mission. As she adjusted the plane's trajectory, Sarah could feel the tension in her muscles and the intensity of the situation. The mocking officers from the briefing room, if they could see her now, would realize that this was no ordinary pilot. The name Viper was no joke. Every decision she made in those moments reflected years of experience, hours in the cockpit, and countless missions where hesitation had meant danger. Her calm under pressure was her greatest weapon, and it allowed her to think clearly even as chaos threatened to erupt below. Her eyes scanned the enemy positions again. One misstep and the ground team could be surrounded. Sarah knew she had to act quickly and decisively. She calculated the timing, factoring in altitude, speed, wind conditions, and the unpredictable movements of enemy combatants. With a controlled but daring maneuver, she dove closer to the ground, weaving through trees and hills to avoid detection while positioning herself perfectly to provide cover. The roar of the engines seemed to blend with her heartbeat, steady and relentless, as she prepared to strike. At the same time, her mind considered backup plans. If this approach failed, she had alternative routes, alternate attack angles, and contingency strategies. She had learned over time that success in high-stakes missions required flexibility, quick thinking, and the courage to act when hesitation could be deadly. She reviewed each option mentally, ready to adapt at the slightest hint of unexpected enemy movement. Then came the first critical moment. A small group of enemy soldiers had broken through a forward position and were moving toward an exposed squad. Sarah's decision had to be immediate. She adjusted her approach, taking advantage of the terrain to shield her position from enemy radar while lining up her targeting systems. With precision born of years of experience, she struck. The enemy was disrupted, forced to retreat or lose their advantage. The ground team was safe for now, but Sarah knew the mission was far from over. As she continued the operation, Sarah's confidence grew. Each maneuver, each decision, and each small victory reinforced her skill and determination. The mocking whispers of the briefing room faded from her mind entirely. In this moment, it was no longer about names or appearances. It was about results, timing, and the ability to protect her team. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that actions, not words, would speak for her. Even as the tension mounted and new threats emerged, Sarah remained composed. She guided the mission with a mixture of courage, skill, and intelligence. Every eye on the ground that could see her plane must have recognized the difference between an ordinary pilot and one who was fully in command of the situation. Every movement she made was deliberate, calculated, and designed to ensure the success of the operation and the safety of those under her protection. By the end of this initial phase of the mission, Sarah had not only managed to stabilize the operation, but had also begun to turn the tide in favor of her team. Enemy forces were cautious now, aware of a pilot whose movements were precise, deadly, and unpredictable. Sarah had demonstrated that the name Viper was not a joke. It was a warning. As she climbed slightly to gain a better overview of the next stage of the mission, Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe. She knew the hardest part was still ahead, but the confidence in her abilities and the quiet acknowledgement of her skill in real time strengthened her resolve. The mocking laughter from before would soon seem insignificant compared to the reality of her actions, and she was ready to prove that her call sign carried weight far beyond words. The sky above the mission area was a mix of sunlight and shadow as Captain Sarah Viper Jennings maneuvered her aircraft with complete focus. Every second mattered. The blackout in communications had made her team vulnerable, and enemy forces were testing the limits of their defenses. But Sarah's mind was sharp, her instincts honed from years of flying in high-risk situations. She had trained for moments like this, when split-second decisions could mean life or death. Every turn, every adjustment of speed and altitude was precise, deliberate, and aimed at protecting her team below. As she approached a particularly dense stretch of forest where enemy forces were attempting to ambush the ground units, Sarah knew she had to act decisively. A small clearing appeared ahead, revealing enemy positions that had been hidden from aerial surveillance. Her eyes narrowed as she analyzed the situation. The enemy had split into small groups, trying to encircle the ground team. A miscalculation on her part could allow them to succeed. But hesitation was not an option. Sarah pushed the aircraft lower, flying almost at treetop level, weaving carefully to remain undetected while positioning herself for maximum impact. The roar of the engines was deafening inside the cockpit, but Sarah barely noticed it. Her mind was entirely on the mission, calculating angles, timing, and movements. She targeted the enemy positions with precision, coordinating in her head with what she knew of the ground team's location. Even without direct communication, her planning allowed her to anticipate their needs. She released a controlled strike that disrupted the enemy formations, forcing them to retreat and preventing them from reaching the vulnerable ground units. Her movements were smooth, almost effortless, but each was the result of years of experience and countless hours in the cockpit. On the ground, the team noticed the sudden disruption. Their attackers were thrown off, giving them precious seconds to regroup and strengthen their positions. Sarah watched intently from above, ready to respond to any new threats. She was constantly adjusting her altitude, banking left and right, scanning the terrain with eagle eyes. Nothing escaped her notice. The slightest movement, a shadow in the trees, or a glint of metal could indicate danger. Her ability to remain calm while managing all of this simultaneously was what set her apart from others, especially the officers who had laughed at her call sign earlier. Each successful strike reinforced her confidence, and yet she remained vigilant. The enemy was unpredictable, and one careless move could turn the tide against her team. Sarah's training had taught her that overconfidence was as dangerous as fear. She anticipated that the enemy would attempt to regroup quickly and perhaps launch a counterattack. With this in mind, she adjusted her approach, taking advantage of natural terrain features to shield her plane from enemy observation while keeping her line of sight on critical points where the team might be at risk. In those moments, Sarah felt the true weight of leadership. She was not just a pilot executing maneuvers. She was responsible for the safety and success of every member of the ground team. Her focus intensified as she considered the potential consequences of every decision. The mocking whispers from the briefing room had faded completely from her mind. They were irrelevant now. What mattered was action, skill, and timing, and Sarah had them in abundance. As the enemy regrouped, Sarah noticed a small squad attempting to advance through a narrow pass. The terrain limited their movement, making them an ideal target. With careful precision, she maneuvered the aircraft to provide suppressive support, ensuring that the ground team could advance without heavy resistance. The enemy fired sporadically, but none of the attacks reached her plane. She maintained a delicate balance between aggression and caution, always aware of the need to protect herself while neutralizing the threat below. The ground units responded immediately, taking advantage of the cover she provided. Communication blackout or not, her strategic actions allowed them to move safely and maintain momentum. It was as if they were dancing in perfect coordination, even without speaking, her actions guiding them like an invisible hand. Sarah's ability to read the battlefield, anticipate enemy moves, and act decisively had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a controlled engagement. For a moment, she allowed herself a brief sense of satisfaction. The operation had shifted in their favor, largely because of her quick thinking and precise execution. Every maneuver, every calculated risk had paid off. The officers who had laughed at her call sign would never have imagined the skill and courage required to handle this situation. But Sarah did not dwell on that. She knew that the mission was far from over and that she had to remain alert for any sudden threats that could emerge at a moment's notice. As she climbed slightly to gain a better overview of the battlefield, Sarah realized that her presence had created a turning point. Enemy forces were hesitant now, unsure of where Viper might strike next. Her actions had not only protected her team but had also disrupted the enemy's plans, giving her side a significant advantage. The effectiveness of her maneuvers was a reminder that experience, skill, and calm decision-making could triumph over doubt, mockery, or initial underestimation. The air around her seemed to hum with anticipation as she continued to monitor every movement below. Sarah knew that the next phase of the mission would demand even greater precision and courage. But for now, she had proven one undeniable fact. The name Viper was not a joke. It represented a pilot who could take control of chaos, act decisively under pressure, and turn the tide in the face of danger. Her team could rely on her, and soon, everyone watching, even those who had mocked her, would recognize her extraordinary skill. Back at the command headquarters, the mood was tense. Officers and generals were reviewing live updates from the mission, trying to piece together what was happening in the field. Screens displayed maps, real-time troop movements, and scattered video feeds from drones and ground units. The operation was progressing, but not without complications. Suddenly, a series of reports caught the attention of General Matthews, the highest-ranking officer present. One after another, He noticed that critical enemy positions had been neutralized and that the ground team had avoided serious casualties despite the earlier communication blackout. The general leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied the data. Who was behind these precise, almost uncanny maneuvers? His experience told him that this was no ordinary pilot. The timing of each strike, the selection of targets, and the smooth coordination with the ground forces all suggested a highly skilled operator. Yet, in the live mission feed, there was no clear identification of the aircraft. All the screens labeled it simply as Viper. The general's brow furrowed. He remembered the briefing earlier that morning, the call sign that had drawn laughter from some officers. Viper, they had mocked. A funny name, a novelty, perhaps a rookie, they had said. But now, staring at the evidence of tactical brilliance unfolding on the monitors, General Matthews realized that the nickname carried far more weight than anyone had imagined. He gestured to an aide and asked, "Who's flying Viper? Call her back now." The order was brief, but it carried authority. The room fell silent. The officers who had laughed at the call sign earlier shifted in their seats uncomfortably. Some tried to suppress smirks, but the seriousness in the general's tone left no room for jokes. They quickly located the communication channel and prepared to relay the command to the pilot in the air. Meanwhile, the other officers watched closely, curiosity and disbelief mixing on their faces. They had underestimated the pilot, and now they were about to learn the truth. High above the battlefield, Captain Sarah Viper Jennings was fully immersed in her mission. She had been so focused on the enemy movements and the safety of the ground team that she hadn't noticed the sudden surge in attention her actions were drawing back at headquarters. When the call came through, her calm, confident voice responded immediately. "This is Viper. Go ahead." There was no hesitation, no change in tone, only the precise professionalism she carried into every mission. On the screens at command, the effect was immediate. The general nodded, satisfied that the order had reached the correct pilot. But for the officers who had mocked her call sign, the sound of her voice over the radio was jarring. They had expected a young, inexperienced pilot, maybe nervous or unsure. Instead, they heard authority, experience, and a quiet, unshakable confidence. It was the voice of someone who had been through countless operations and had earned every bit of respect she now commanded. The realization hit them like a wave. The precise strikes, the flawless timing, the ability to anticipate enemy moves, and the calm execution. They all belonged to this pilot. The one they had laughed at, the one they had assumed was a novelty. Suddenly, their earlier mockery seemed foolish. The call sign Viper was no joke. It was a symbol of skill, precision, and leadership. General Matthews, observing the reactions in the room, allowed himself a small nod of approval. He had known from the beginning that a skilled operator could make a difference, but the efficiency and courage displayed by Viper exceeded even his expectations. He leaned back slightly, thinking of the ground team that was now in a much stronger position thanks to her actions. She had turned what could have been a dangerous situation into a controlled, advantageous engagement. The officers who had snickered earlier could hardly look at each other. Their whispers and jokes were gone, replaced by astonishment and quiet respect. Some even began taking notes on her tactics, recognizing the importance of analyzing her decisions for future operations. They understood now that this pilot's actions were more valuable than any call sign could ever suggest. Viper wasn't just a nickname. It was a warning, a sign that someone with extraordinary ability was on the field, guiding the mission toward success. Sarah, still fully in control of her aircraft, continued to monitor the battlefield with unerring focus. She wasn't aware of the impact her performance was having back at headquarters, but her results spoke for themselves. Every move she made disrupted the enemy, protected the ground team, and maintained the momentum of the mission. Her experience and skill turned the tide, leaving a lasting impression not only on those witnessing from the ground but also on the higher command, who now recognized her as a true asset to the operation. In those moments, it became clear that perception could change instantly with proof. What had started as a mocking joke, her call sign, was now associated with leadership, bravery, and unmatched precision. Sarah's actions had not only saved lives but had also earned her respect at the highest levels of command. The officers who doubted her would carry this lesson with them, understanding that true skill and courage cannot be judged by appearances or names. By the time the initial threat was neutralized, the entire command room had shifted in tone. Where there had been doubt, there was now admiration. Where there had been laughter, there was now acknowledgement of her talent. And though Sarah remained focused entirely on the mission above, the ripple effect of her skill and professionalism had already begun to redefine the way others perceived Viper. As the mission progressed, Captain Sarah "Viper" Jennings remained fully focused on the task at hand. She had stabilized the situation for the ground teams, neutralized enemy movements, and maintained control despite the earlier communication blackout. Yet above all, she had captured the attention of headquarters, including General Matthews, who had now made the critical call to connect with her directly. This was a moment that would reveal not just her skill, but also her identity, and it was about to leave everyone in the command room speechless. The officers who had laughed at her call sign earlier were now standing quietly, their earlier jokes completely silenced. They knew something remarkable was happening, even if they couldn't fully comprehend it yet. Whispers had been replaced by stunned silence as monitors displayed the mission unfolding in real time. General Matthews, calm yet commanding, leaned forward and repeated the order through the secure line. "Call her back now." Back in the cockpit, Sarah's attention remained on the terrain below, but her fingers worked the controls effortlessly, almost automatically. She responded to the incoming communication instantly, her voice steady and professional. "This is Viper. Go ahead," she said. There was no hesitation, no faltering tone, just clarity, authority, and calm. Her words carried the weight of experience, the confidence of countless missions, and the focus of someone who had been trained to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. The moment her voice echoed through the headquarters, the atmosphere shifted. The officers who had mocked her call sign only minutes before now realized they were listening to someone far more formidable than they had ever imagined. Every inflection, every measured pause in her voice conveyed competence and control. The name Viper suddenly no longer sounded like a joke. It sounded like a warning. The very room that had been filled with laughter now held an almost reverent silence. General Matthews' eyes narrowed, scanning the monitors, listening carefully, and noting the confidence in her voice. "That's not a rookie," he muttered under his breath. His experience allowed him to recognize skill immediately, and everything he was seeing suggested that this pilot was more than capable. She was exceptional. He nodded slightly to his aides, confirming that the call had been correctly routed. The officers who had previously doubted her felt a mixture of awe and embarrassment, realizing that their underestimation had been premature, and dangerously so. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to acknowledge the shift in perception, though only briefly. She didn't speak of her years of training, her previous missions, or the honors she had earned. Those were irrelevant now. What mattered was action, clarity, and results. She had already demonstrated her skill through the precise maneuvers, the timing of the strikes, and her anticipation of enemy movements. Her professionalism was undeniable, and now, for the first time, the higher command would hear it directly from her. "Viper, confirm your status," General Matthews asked, his tone steady but tinged with curiosity. He had to hear it from her, to verify that the operator controlling the mission was indeed capable of what the screens were showing. "I'm stable and on course, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Ground team secured in the area. Enemy movements neutralized. Continuing mission as planned." Every word was concise, purposeful, and carried the authority of someone who had full command of the situation. The room at headquarters went completely silent. The officers who had mocked her call sign were frozen, realizing that they had been wrong in their assumptions. Their laughter, the sideways glances, and the whispered jokes were now replaced with awe and respect. This young pilot, who had seemed like a novelty to them, was now a model of skill, courage, and leadership. The name Viper had transformed from a source of humor into a symbol of excellence and precision. General Matthews allowed a small, approving nod. His instincts had been right. This pilot was exceptional. the clarity of her commands, the calm authority in her voice, and the results they were seeing on the monitors all confirmed that she was someone who could not only lead missions but redefine expectations. He made a mental note to ensure that her actions and decisions would be studied for future operations. Meanwhile, Sarah continued executing the mission with unerring focus. She remained unaware of the exact impact her voice and presence had on the command room, but her professionalism ensured that every action she took was correct, timely, and strategic. She maintained situational awareness, guiding her team through obstacles, positioning her aircraft perfectly, and protecting the ground forces. The result was a seamless coordination that seemed almost choreographed, a combination of instinct, training, and courage. The revelation of her identity had changed the dynamics completely. The officers who had doubted her earlier were now witnesses to her undeniable skill. They understood that judgment based on appearances or names was meaningless in the face of competence and experience. Sarah had not only proven herself in the air but had also demonstrated the power of calm, confident leadership under pressure. As the mission continued, the officers and General Matthews could only watch in admiration. The pilot named Viper was no longer just a call sign. They now recognized her as an extraordinary operative whose skill, bravery, and strategic thinking could change the outcome of even the most dangerous operations. The earlier mockery was forgotten, replaced entirely with respect and acknowledgement of her true capability. After the revelation of her skill and identity, the atmosphere both in the field and back at headquarters shifted dramatically. Captain Sarah "Viper" Jennings had shown her exceptional abilities during the mission, turning what could have been a dangerous and chaotic operation into a controlled and effective engagement. But it wasn't just about completing the mission. Her performance had transformed the way everyone perceived her. The officers who had once mocked her call sign now struggled to reconcile the confident, highly capable pilot they were seeing with the image they had dismissed as a joke. On the ground, the team she was supporting began moving with renewed confidence. Her precise maneuvers and calculated strikes had cleared paths that would have otherwise been perilous. Soldiers whispered among themselves, acknowledging the invisible hand guiding their safety and success. They had relied on air support before, but never with such clarity, timing, and effectiveness. Sarah's actions had created a rhythm between the ground units and the air support that felt almost seamless, as if they were moving as one organism rather than separate teams. Back at headquarters, the officers who had ridiculed her call sign were quietly taking notes and reviewing footage. Some avoided eye contact with one another, embarrassed by their earlier behavior. They had underestimated her completely. The mocking tone, the jokes, the sideways glances, all of it had been replaced by a mixture of respect, awe, and humility. For many, this was a lesson in judging people not by names, appearances, or titles, but by their abilities and actions. General Matthews observed the scene with a calm satisfaction. He had recognized her potential early on, but seeing it unfold in real time reinforced his confidence in her skills. He understood that leadership often required not only ability but also the courage to face doubt and skepticism without letting it affect performance. Sarah embodied that courage. Her calm under pressure, her intelligence, and her courage were teaching everyone present a vital lesson. True competence cannot be measured by mockery or superficial impressions. As the mission continued, Sarah coordinated with the ground team to maintain momentum. Enemy forces were regrouping, attempting to mount a secondary offensive. Yet, every time they moved, Sarah anticipated their strategy. She adjusted her altitude, shifted her flight path, and provided precise cover fire that neutralized threats before they could endanger the team. Her skill turned the battlefield into a controlled environment where her team could act decisively, rather than react nervously. The soldiers below moved faster, safer, and with more confidence than they ever had, knowing Viper was watching over them. In the command room, the officers' expressions had completely changed. The laughter and skepticism had vanished, replaced by genuine admiration. Some muttered quietly, "She's remarkable. I underestimated her." Others, who had previously tried to mask their doubt with casual remarks, now nodded silently, acknowledging that she had earned every ounce of respect she received. It was clear that the call sign Viper was no longer merely a label. It had become a symbol of precision, skill, and courage. Sarah, completely focused on the mission, remained unaware of the full extent of the impact her actions were having on those watching from afar. But the results spoke for themselves. The ground team advanced safely, the enemy's efforts to flank them had been completely thwarted, and the mission was progressing smoothly. Her calm demeanor and flawless execution were evidence of a pilot who had not only mastered her craft, but had also developed the ability to inspire confidence without needing to say a word. Even her teammates, who had been accustomed to working alongside her before, noticed a difference. There was an added level of respect in the way they looked at her, the way they followed her guidance, and the way they coordinated with her. What had begun as doubt or skepticism had transformed into complete trust. They knew she could be relied upon in even the most critical moments, and that trust made the team more effective, cohesive, and fearless. The officers who had mocked her earlier began discussing strategies and reviewing her actions for lessons they could apply in future operations. They were learning from her in real time. Every move she made demonstrated not only skill but foresight, adaptability, and leadership. In a way, Sarah had become a teacher without speaking a single word. Her actions were the lesson, and the battlefield was the classroom. By the time the mission entered its final phase, the transformation was complete. The ridicule that had once surrounded her call sign was replaced entirely with respect and admiration. Sarah had not just succeeded in the mission. She had changed the perception of those around her. She had proven that courage, intelligence, and skill were far more important than a name or appearance. She had turned mockery into respect and doubt into trust, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. Even after the mission ended, the story of her performance spread throughout the ranks. Her call sign, once a source of laughter, became a symbol of excellence and precision. Young pilots would remember it as a name associated with skill, courage, and leadership, and senior officers would cite it as an example of professionalism under pressure. Sarah Viper Jennings had proven that true respect is earned through action, not words, and that capability always outweighs perception. By the time the mission was coming to a close, Captain Sarah Viper Jennings had firmly established herself as the key figure in its success. The enemy forces had been scattered, the ground team had secured their objectives without serious injuries, and the operation had gone far more smoothly than anyone could have expected given the earlier communication blackout. But the results of her actions extended far beyond the battlefield. Sarah had changed the way people thought about her call sign, and the value of true skill and leadership. The first signs of this shift were visible even before the debriefing. Officers and soldiers alike discussed her actions quietly among themselves, marveling at the precision and timing she had demonstrated. Even those who had initially mocked her call signs spoke with admiration, recounting moments where her instincts and calculated decisions had saved lives. It was no longer a matter of doubt. Sarah's competence had been proven beyond question. Her nickname, Viper, had transformed from a symbol of humor to one of respect and authority. Back at headquarters, General Matthews oversaw the final reports from the mission. The operation's success had been almost flawless, and the contribution of the pilot identified as Viper was central to that outcome. The general addressed the team, emphasizing the critical role her quick thinking and strategic maneuvers had played. He made sure everyone understood that leadership and skill could not be judged by appearances, names, or initial impressions. Sarah had embodied that lesson, and her performance would be remembered and studied in future training exercises. Meanwhile, Sarah herself remained modest. Even after such a significant contribution, she focused on the remaining tasks, ensuring the aircraft landed safely, debriefing with her team, and reporting any final details that could affect follow-up operations. She didn't seek praise or recognition. Her satisfaction came from knowing the mission had succeeded and her team was safe. Yet, quietly, she was aware that perceptions had changed. The officers who had once laughed at her call sign now looked at her with respect. The soldiers on the ground had complete trust in her abilities. Even the general had acknowledged her extraordinary skill. The debriefing was another moment of recognition. Sarah calmly explained her decisions, the challenges she had faced, and the maneuvers she had executed to protect the team and neutralize threats. Every detail was shared with clarity and professionalism. As she spoke, those present realized the depth of her experience. Her strategic thinking, her anticipation of enemy movements, and her ability to maintain calm under extreme pressure were remarkable. The same people who had joked about Viper earlier now nodded with understanding and admiration. After the debriefing, Sarah walked through the headquarters corridors. Officers and soldiers stopped to greet her, some quietly expressing their respect, others smiling with genuine admiration. For many, it was a lesson in humility. Never judge someone by a name, a title, or an initial impression. Sarah's actions had taught them the importance of capability, courage, and professionalism above all else. She had become more than just a skilled pilot. She was now a symbol of excellence that others could aspire to. The impact of the mission extended beyond the immediate operation. Her colleagues began to reflect on how mockery or underestimation could cloud judgment. Young pilots were inspired by her performance, realizing that courage, intelligence, and skill could overcome bias and skepticism. Senior officers took note of her precision and leadership, understanding that a pilot who could think so clearly under pressure was an invaluable asset to any mission. Her example set a new standard for what it meant to be a capable, respected officer in the Air Force. Even in casual conversations afterward, her call sign sparked a new reaction. Instead of laughter or ridicule, Viper became synonymous with courage, reliability, and strategic brilliance. The lesson was clear. True capability always shines through, regardless of how it is initially perceived. Sarah's actions had demonstrated that skill and leadership earn respect far more effectively than words or appearances ever could. Later, when reflecting quietly on the day's events, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of pride. She had faced mockery, skepticism, and doubt, yet she had remained focused on the mission. Every maneuver she had executed, every decision she had made, had been guided by preparation, experience, and a commitment to protect her team. The mission's success was not just a victory in the field. It was a victory for professionalism, courage, and the power of actions over perception. As word of the mission spread through the base and beyond, the story of Viper became legendary. Her colleagues shared accounts of her precision, the way she had anticipated enemy movements, and how she had protected the ground team under extreme conditions. The officers who had mocked her earlier took special note, understanding that underestimating someone based on a name or initial impressions was a mistake they would never repeat. Sarah had not only completed her mission successfully, but had also changed attitudes, inspiring respect and admiration across the ranks. By the end of the day, it was clear that Sarah's legacy was secure. Viper had become a symbol of courage, precision, and leadership, a call sign that carried the weight of skill, respect, and professionalism. Her story reminded everyone that true respect is earned through actions, not words, and that doubt and mockery cannot withstand the power of capability and determination. Sarah had proven that even in the face of skepticism, excellence cannot be ignored, and the name Viper would forever be associated with skill, bravery, and leadership.